All right. So let's understand what they got wrong about breast cancer.
Yeah, this was a big one for me because this was one of the big aha moments that really taught me that genetics is sort of underperforming in terms of what's actually available. So what we were using as a tool genetically was BRCA, right? It's a scary four-letter word. You tell a woman, or you ask a woman, do you want BRCA? Like, no, I don't want BRCA. And you ask a doctor, do you want, I don't, what is BRCA? I don't know. I just know I don't want it. So BRCA is actually a highly protective gene for breast cancer. What it does, it's actually a tumor suppressor. So if you, God forbid, have breast cancer, it's supposed to go fix it. The challenge is there's certain variations of BRCA that don't do a good job. So the repair tool that you think you have isn't doing its repair. So now, even then, that doesn't mean you're sick. It just means if you were to get breast cancer, you're not going to fix it well. So then we have to ask, well, why would I get breast cancer? Right? So you start to break apart the biochemistry and look at what would cause the inflammation. And the first big clue is it usually happens around the menopause age. Not always, but typically for most women. And this is why there's different reasons. I'm just going to talk about one of the reasons. And there's 10 of them we can talk about. So in that age, you don't have a menstrual cycle anymore. So why is that important? Some women, now let's get into the genetic profile, that first bucket. Here's your red flag. Some women are estrogen dominant. We can determine with your genes that you just make a lot more estrogen than other women. Progesterone converts into testosterone, converts into estrogen. In that path, there's different ways you can go, right? It's like it's highly variable. Some women just go straight to the estrogen path with a very heavy flow, big bucket of estrogen. Step 2 of 3, you then have to convert it into a metabolite before you get rid of it in that monthly cycle. 2, 4, or 16 hydroxyestrogen. 2 is great. 4 and 16 are highly toxic. 16 being more toxic than 4. If you're in one of these latter 2 buckets and you're fueling it with a lot of estrogen, you now know there's a lot of estrogen toxicity. Step 3 of 3, how well do you get rid of it? There's a toxic insult in your body. You now need to clear it just like any other toxin, including the ones you make, right? So the same detox pathways, antioxidation, glutathionization, methylation, or your anti-inflammatory system also support this. So if I were a woman, I would be at high risk because I don't detox well, right? So 3 steps: estrogen dominant, estrogen toxic, bad detox. There's your at-risk profile for the why this disease happens, not what is it, not BRCA, please fix it. I don't fix it well. Well, let's see if I get it or not, right? Now, even then, not every woman with this profile gets sick. So what's the difference? That's when you layer on the epigenetics, which is, was she like 85% of North American women on a birth control pill for 10 years? Did she go on to a hormone replacement therapy on menopause without first understanding what she does with those hormones? Which is no fault of the doctor. They're not taught this, right? So what do you, when I give you estrogen or testosterone, like what does your body do with it? What are the genes instructing to turn it into, right? Do you use Teflon coated frying pans and pesticides and chemicals and all these things that are hormone disruptors that your body treats as an estrogen mimic and just, fuels that fire even more? That's the woman who has the bad profile. Step 1, what's the genetic profile? Step 2, what are my epigenetic choices that are wrong for me? Combine those together. Now I've caused that inflammatory insult to get sick. Why in the menopause age? You don't have a menstrual cycle. You're not getting rid of it anymore. That you're still producing the estrogens. You're still converting it into a metabolite. There's just no cycle. So now all of a sudden, the inflammatory load free flowing in your blood, your body wants to protect you, keep it away from the organs and your vasculature. This is why women fare so much worse than men in cardiovascular problems. Women, 66% of women will die in their first cardiovascular event with 0 previous warning signs, 0 symptoms. They didn't even know they had a problem because they have this heavy load cofactor of estrogen toxicity causing an additional layer of inflammation that men don't have to deal with, at least not to the same degree. Some men do have estrogen toxicity, but not to the level, right? So now you have this woman who is menopausal, and the body keeping it away from the organs and trying to prevent cardiovascular disease, keeping it away from the vasculature, will go and store it in fat. And where do women have fat? The hips, the bum, and the breasts.
Mhm.
Now all of a sudden you got this constant regular dose of estrogen toxicity being stored in your breast with all these glands that were never designed to deal with that level of toxin. Of course that's going to equal breast cancer. And of course, if you've taken a birth control pill for 20 years and upped the numbers, and if you're on a hormone therapy and upped the numbers, and you're surrounded by chemicals and hormone disruptors, and who knows what's in your water, and you've upped all the epigenetic load, that's the woman who gets breast cancer. That's when you then ask the question, what version of BRCA do I have? How well do I fight this thing? Right? But why did it happen to begin with? If I can tell a 5-year-old girl, here's your profile, here's exactly what your epigenetic choices should be, why should she ever get sick? Right? That should be medicine.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah. And the idea of starting at a young age like that, I mean, just think how that would change the picture of healthcare in the world.
I've done it for all my kids. I have 3 kids. Whether it's disease, academics, sports, diet, nutrition, I've mapped out everything for they eat different because I know one of them doesn't metabolize carbs and has a bad insulin response, so he crashes after pasta. One is the polar opposite of me up here in terms of reward. And so we had a lot of friction in the beginning in terms of what I believe success to be and what he believes success to be. So there was always, and then I realized we just perceive the world entirely differently. And let me give you that example. So the dopamine pathway, that neurochemical that allows you to experience pleasure and reward, is experienced at different levels of intensity by different people. So depending how dense the receptors are in your brain, you may feel it slim to none or at a very high degree. Then COMT, which also clears your hormones, by the way, clears neurochemicals. And depending how fast your COMT is, we now know how long that experience lasts. So how intense and for what duration, how long. So if you are like me, that has the ultra slim density receptors, I feel way down here, and I have the super fast COMT, and it's over before it even started. I had this like reward seeking, addictive, high functioning anxiety type behavior where I constantly like more, let's do it, we got to get it done, right? Because I'm constantly pushing towards reward, or I get depressed. The eldest son has the absolute maximum density of receptors, and he has the slowest potential COMT, right? So now all of a sudden, he's seeing the world as like everything's already okay. Like he's just constantly in this sense of reward and pleasure. It's good enough. Everything's good enough. And when we say here's homework 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, he gets the one done that he actually enjoys, and the other 4 he kind of thinks he did it, but he never even started because he's already experiencing reward from just what's going on in daily life. Doesn't need to pursue it. So where that leads to is sort of this jack of all trades that is constantly triggered by the next reward versus a deep specialist that finds the thing that they're good at and binges on it. Because once he feels that elevated pleasure, because it lasts so long, it's hard to get out of it. So whereas I'm shifting gears, he's hyper laser focused, right? Completely different. We're 2 human beings that see the world entirely differently just because of that one. And there's 6 or 7 other neurochemicals I can talk about to paint an even deeper picture.
Wow. Fascinating. Just so fascinating. So there's a couple of other things. I know when I was going through my second healing journey and I did some DNA testing and I realized that I had, a genetic SNP for vitamin D absorption and manufacturing and vitamin A conversion. So that was really like an aha moment. It really helped me to understand, even though I live in Florida, unless I supplement with vitamin D, my numbers are on the low side. So I have to supplement.
That one, out of all the micronutrients, it's the most important to analyze genetically because it's the only one that if you were to overdose, it's potentially toxic. And so your body is very particular in how it metabolizes it. And that can be a problem for us because we no longer get the sun our ancestors did. So what is it doing? When you go to the doctor will test your blood and tell you how much vitamin D you have. That's step 1 of 3 genetically. There's a gene that takes vitamin D from the sun and from food and puts it into your blood, right? It metabolizes it. Then you need to transport it to the cell where it's actually used. That's a separate gene. Once it gets to the cell, you need to bind it. So there's 3 steps, 3 genes. And you can have any one of these being turned up and down at various levels. And then all of a sudden, the way you metabolize and utilize vitamin D is very different than someone else. So there's some people where we have to tell them that they need to be taking 10,000 IU a day. There's some people that we need to say that, hey, you need to take it 2 or maybe even 3 times a day, because you transport it so slowly that even if I tell you to take 5,000 IU in the morning, you've only used 1,500 of it because it takes you so long to transport it, right? And these are all factors that allow us to mitigate the overdose of sun our ancestors used to get, right? Let's put it in the blood, but let's not use it right away. Let it sit there. But they were still in the sun, a constant drip of the pot being full, which we don't have, right? So this is where, and of the 22,000 genes that make up your genetic code, 2,000 require vitamin D to function. Yeah,
Wow.
literally 10% of your human biochemistry dependent on this one thing. And that's why, I mean, it's not actually a vitamin, it's a hormone, the way it works, right? Which you know very well. So, and if you don't have this key hormone, it's like saying, hey, let's get testosterone out of your body. What's that going to do? People think of it as the immunity vitamin or bone health vitamin. It's the everything vitamin. 10% of what your body's doing needs this in order to actually